Willowbrook, what's up? Today we're in Matthew chapter 11. And in our chapter today, we read about John the Baptist asking if Jesus is the Messiah or not. We read about unrepentant towns, and we also read about the Father being revealed in the Son. But really where I want to hang out today is at the very end of the chapter, starting in verse 28, Jesus says this, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." I think this is beautiful. Whenever I read this, it just makes me exhale like, yes, this is what I need, rest. And there are three things that Jesus says to do in our passage today. The first, he says, "Come to me." And this is really an invitation to all of us, to every person. But it's really only those of us that are like the little children he mentions in verse 25 that are going to hear this call. Those of us that know that we can't do it in our own strength. He says, "Come to me and I will give you rest." Then he says to take his yoke upon you. That's the second thing. And here's why. He says, "For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Now, if you remember, a yoke is not what we find in an egg, right? A yoke is this device made out of wood that connects two animals together so they can pull a plow and plow a field, for example. Now, it's interesting that Jesus says, "Come to me if you're weary, if you're burdened, and put this burden on you, put this yoke on you." It's interesting that he says to take my yoke and not just to rest and never do anything. Now, Jesus is clear here that there's still work to do. But what he is saying is he's saying to remove that burden that you haven't been able to carry, the burden that you've been trying to carry and it's crushing you. Take that off and put my yoke upon you instead. Because his yoke, he says, is easy, or it's suitable for you. And his burden is light. And the reason why he says his burden is light is because, again, going back to this image of the two animals being yoked together, picture you take on Jesus's yoke and Jesus is beside you carrying that burden. So the reason why it's light is because Jesus is carrying it with you. So he says, "Come to me." He says, "Take my yoke upon you." And then he says, "Learn from me." So daily we are called to spend time in prayer with Jesus, to read the scriptures, to worship, to be connected to a local church, to learn from Jesus and become more and more like him every single day. I love this quote from Augustine. It's a famous quote of his. He says, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." So today, are you stressed? Are you burdened? Are you exhausted? Are you at the end of your rope? Jesus has invited you to come and find rest in him.